Welcome everyone to Our Whole Lives Taking Flight webinar series. Today we'll be discussing LGBTQ issues and aging. My name is Reverend Amy Johnson, and I serve as the Minister for Sexuality, Education, and Justice in the United Church of Christ. And I'm joined today by a panel of folks to help us have some really engaging discussion and share some information about this really important topic. Melanie, will you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I am Dr. Melanie Davis. I am the Our Whole Lives Program Manager for the Unitarian Universalist Association. I'd like to welcome you all here. I am also the author of Our Whole Lives Sexuality Education for Older Adults. Jane Fleishman, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, Melanie. Hi, Amy. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. Hi, Anne. I'm so happy that Owl Taking Flight is doing your work. I have tremendous gratitude for Owl and the whole curriculum, and I'm so excited that Owl has taken on older adults, which is partly what I'm going to be talking about today. But also, I'm really grateful to all you facilitators out there. I can't see you, but I know you're there. And just a quick thing about me, I'm really interested in I don't know, I'm an old person, so I'm on this mission. I'm almost 70, and I can't waste any time any longer. So I'm on a mission to promote the sexual wellness and sexual well-being of older adults, particularly LGBTQ older adults and other people in marginalized populations. And Melanie, would you like me to talk a little bit more about some of the issues now, or do you want me to just do an introduction?
We're just going to do introductions Great. At this point.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Reverend Ann Holmes. I am retired, and I am 73. I retired at 71, and I'm going to be talking about what that process was like and what I think some of the pitfalls are, and what I hope you all can, those of you who aren't that age, can help others think about ahead of time.
I'm Dr. Wilhelmina Perry, and I'm 88 years of age, which explains in part why you can't see me, technical issues. I'm retired. I have been active in the Black LGBT community for now, maybe the last 25 years. I am, as I said, 88 years of age. I'm a survivor of a 30-year relationship. I live on a limited income because of some of the factors that we will discuss regarding Social Security. And I want to come and bring particularly information about the Black LGBT older adult.
I am so buoyed up by just hearing you all introduce yourselves. I'm so delighted that each of you said yes today. So thank you so much for being here. Laura has put a message for you all to introduce yourselves and where you're coming in from. I'm seeing some just beloved folks introducing themselves in the chat. I'm so delighted that you all are here with us today. If you have questions, we do ask that you use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. I think it's on the bottom of most screens, but there is a special Q&A button that helps us so much to manage and keep track of questions rather than trying to scroll through the chat. So if you have a question, please use the Q&A today, and we'll get to your questions. If not during the discussion, then at least we have some time at the end that we will save to address questions. So with that, and without further ado, Jane, will you please take it away?
Great. Thanks, Amy. Well, I wanted to talk about a few things today that come up in my work. So what is my work? I mostly teach older adults in senior living communities, people who are in assisted living or independent living. And I also teach the folks who take care of them, mostly social workers. And for the majority of my classes, what's real interesting to me is that people are willing to ask real questions. And so if any of you AL facilitators out there are thinking, will these people even talk to me? Will they be too nervous? don't worry. People are psyched and ready to talk. They may not be able to talk in front of all their friends. And so generally what I do is I say, I'll stick around for 15 minutes or so after the class, and then I'll set up a little office space in the back of the room, and people just bombard me with great questions. So remember that. Try to, give people different possibilities. But one of the things that comes up for me is that even though most of the statistics are, very positive about older adult sexuality, for instance, in 2018, the University of Michigan paired up with AARP, and they found that 74% of older adults said that sex was important, and that more than 50% of those folks said that they were in a romantic relationship that was also sexually active. And that more than half of the older adults that they had interviewed said that they were sexually satisfied. Most of those people are in heteronormative or heterosexual relationships. They very rarely survey or interview people in LGBTQ elder communities. And so when I did my research, I really was interested in LGBTQ elders. And what I found was that people weren't always very sexually satisfied. They were sexual beings, and they continue to be sexual, but they weren't always sexually satisfied. And why is that? Partly because nobody was really paying attention to their sexuality education for most of their lives, and they were really kind of ruled out of most classrooms. One woman said, I'm a lesbian. I never thought that anybody would, even consider my sexuality when I was in school. And so then I realized that for many people, there's a real lack of understanding around what is sex and what is ageism. So Ateret Gewurz-Medan, one of my favorite sex researchers, I can give Laura or Amy or Melanie a link to her latest article, talks about this thing called sexual ageism. Isn't that great? It's like putting two possible oppressive areas intersecting with each other. And she says that, older adults really suffer from sexual ageism, particularly older adults in marginalized communities. Oh, thanks, Melanie. And then a friend of mine who's also a colleague, some of you might know, Lucy Fielding, just wrote a real interesting book about trans sexuality. And although Lucy's main focus is about teaching clinicians about trans folks' sexuality, I think she does a great job talking about issues that really intersect with older people of any sexual orientation, but particularly in LGBTQ communities, and talks about how you have to be white, cisgender, heterosexual, thin, tall, able-bodied, and get this, folks, 18 to 35 years old to be considered erotic in this world. And she calls it erotic privilege. What? 18 to 35, that is a very small window. I left that window many, many decades ago. And so what I try to do is I talk about these issues around erotic privilege, sexual ageism, sexual justice, which I think is a real interesting term that kind of, takes off in this idea about environmental justice and racial justice and so many other areas, food justice we talk about now. And so I like this idea of sexual justice, particularly for older LGBTQ folks. And right now I'm doing some research on a new course that I want to do for LGBTQ elders' sexuality, and I'm getting some great responses. And I hope to have some really good preliminary results soon that I can put into my new course. So in addition to speaking, I also do a lot of writing, and I have this podcast. And the podcast is called Our Better Half. Melanie has been a guest on our show. She was great. If any of you are interested, it's real easy to access wherever you get your podcasts. And it's just a short podcast. It's like 20, 25 minutes. We try to keep it to what we used to call commuting time. Nobody seems to commute anymore, but you know what I mean? It's short, so you can get to it. And right now, Abel Knuckle is our latest guest. And Abel is a professor at the University of Minnesota School of Social Work in Duluth. And Abel runs a trans elders kind of support group. It's online. It's really cool, really interesting. And Abel's doing great research and really great community service. So I think I'll stop there because I just wanted to say a little bit about some of the things that I'm doing. And if people have questions, I'd love to answer them. Or if you have any thoughts, or if you want to come see me in the back of the room at the end of the workshop. No, I'm just kidding. But, you know, if you're interested, there's a lot of really beginning to be good research out there, and a lot of people who are now starting to talk about LGBTQ elders as a sexual group. And I think that's been a phenomenal change. One last thing, I came out as a lesbian in my 20s, you know, a million years ago. And everybody talked about this thing, LBD. Now, LBD, when Bill Clinton was president, was little black dress. That's not the LBD we talked about. It was lesbian bed. I don't even want to say it, because if I say it, people are going to like say, doesn't it still exist? And I thought, you know, this was like the end of my sexual life. As soon as I hit 6 months or 6 weeks, whenever it was, in a sexual relationship with another woman, that we didn't have enough testosterone to go around and we were going to just, well, I've been on this mission. Remember I said I'm on a mission? The other mission I'm on is to dispel the myth of lesbian bed death. You've heard it here today. It does not exist. Researchers far more serious than I am have dispelled this myth. And if you have younger or older people in your workshops who are worried about, what do I do about lack of desire? That's different. That's a whole different thing. And there's a whole new book about desire. But yeah, thank you. Just don't even say it out loud. You know. But anyway, there's a lot of really great information about desire that many people are talking about now. But this business about this one group having none, get rid of it. Okay, that's my last word, Amy.
Thank you so much, Jane. I wanted to, because you mentioned that you came out in your 20s, and I will say I came out as bisexual in my 50s because I was socialized to marry a man, and I married a man, although I was attracted to women too. And it wasn't until I got divorced and said, hey, I can start over. Who do I want to be? That I was able to actually, or I felt more comfortable disclosing that. And that is one thing that we do in our whole lives, is we don't ask people to put a stake in the ground at any point in life, that they can have their own journey.
That's so great. That's beautiful. Thanks. And all the research bears that out too, that people change throughout their lives in different contexts. Yeah, thanks.
We love who we love. Yeah.
That's right.
We like. Reverend Holmes, are you ready to chat with us? I think you're still muted.
I appreciate what you were saying, Jane, because I think that's a real issue. And so I am really glad to hear that you're tackling it and helping people see that there's something beyond 30. But I wanted to talk today about sort of what it was like for my wife and me to retire. When we did, we retired. And one word of advice to all you folks out there who are talking to, interacting with, doing anything around older lesbian, LGBTQ people, don't retire on the same day. That is really, really hard. We did that, and both of us had a lot of energy around retirement. And I mean, after all the parties and everything are over, you're left with, you're retired. And so what would have been helpful for us is if one of us retired 1 month and the other the next month. So you had a little bit of lead-in time. And I didn't even think about that at the time, but that was amazing. The other thing that I think is important to think about as we age, as part of the LGBTQ community, is that many of us don't have families. And if you're thinking about moving because you have to, because you want to, because you want a warmer climate, whatever reason that you might be thinking about moving, it's really important to maintain the relationships you have wherever you are, even as you move, because it's difficult to develop new relationships. It takes time to do that. And if you don't have family to be supportive of you, you need to have somebody that's supportive of you around you. And so that, I think, is also something that Linda and I didn't think about that either. I'm telling you all the things that Linda and I did not think about. Our daughter lives about 25 minutes from us, but we didn't, and her children, but we didn't want them to be our social life. So, and they're not. And we babysit all the time and that sort of thing. But we didn't think about moving to a new town, to a new community. Although when we were moving into our targeted 55 community, we asked the person, are there other people like us, you know? And they said one other couple. Oh, it won't be a problem, they said. Okay, and it hasn't been, thank God. I think that there are people here who have weeded themselves away from us, and that other folks we have a great relationship with. But we worked hard at doing that. We went to everything. There's not a lot. We were in a pretty small community. So, but we went to all the dance, the social things that would happen in the evenings. They have a pig pick and we moved south. What can I tell you? Our daughter stayed down there, so we had to go south. They have things like that. And so we made it a point to go to those things. We worried about moving into this community of all heterosexuals. And there aren't even that many people of color. So that it's a pretty white heterosexual area. I put up a flag immediately, and so people knew who we were. They knew who we were anyway. You know, I'm sure that the grapevine was talking about us before we even got there, through the woman that sold us the house. But you know, oh yeah, okay, you're them. You're those people that live. Oh, okay. That you get a lot of that. Now, we have developed some great relationships, and we happen to live in an awesome community. I mean, we're very, 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 very lucky. And I say lucky because we didn't do a lot of research. And the research that we did, there are some communities out there that are lesbian or gay or whatever type of communities, but some of those are expensive. So those people who are either don't have a couple or don't have money or whatever, those are the ones I'm concerned about, because I'm not sure where they'll be able to go, and how they will be able to find their community. Another thing that was really important to us is that we moved. I was 71 and she was 69. We moved at a time when we could still get around, when we could still interact easily, when we could still do the things that we were doing yesterday. If you wait too long to make that move, then it's hard. And as soon as we got here, I got COVID and I was pretty sick. We couldn't find a doctor because nobody wanted to take Medicare. We finally found one, but I had a partner who was in the medical field, so she knew what to do. And so she went around, hunted. We finally found a medical doctor and a bunch of other physicians and people that we needed to have in our lives. But that, I think, is a really big concern, is helping. And that's where I think the churches need to come into play, and that all of you all that are having these conversations with folks, they need to know, we need to know what our healthcare is, what the healthcare is we're moving to, because every area has different healthcare, whether it's Blue Cross Blue Shield. Oh, they don't take that here, but they take this other thing here that we didn't know about. So we need to be able to help people navigate. And in order to do that, we need to do the research. So that back in the day when in the church, you had a list of all the helping professions and things that were around. We need to have that today in our communities. And we need our churches to be able to speak up about that. We need our churches to embrace older folks. we're invisible. Everybody is older is invisible, and we really are invisible. And even in a church where most people are gray haired, we're still invisible. And it's still hard to break in. And that's something that we have found with the church that we go to, which is really nice. But they weren't falling over themselves, helping us figure things out. Churches need to provide visitation for folks who can't get out. And they have to take that on as a ministry. And churches need to affirm our community over and over and over again. It needs to be in big letters in the bulletin. We affirm the LGBT because nobody else is affirming us, friends. And the longer we go in this world, the fewer people are going to be affirming us. And so I need to be able to find places that affirm me. And how do I do that? If I wasn't such a, who I am, it would be hard. And you need to provide rides. Churches need to provide rides for folks who can't get out at night. Don't forget, many of us can't drive at night. So anything that you do in the winter, it stops at 5 o'clock for them. And then the loneliness sets in because there's nothing to do. And the church needs to examine who are the folks who are aging. And look at that and have honest conversations about that. We've got to be honest about who we are, just like you are talking, Jane, about the sexuality, who we are as people in the world, and how do we get to the grocery store? And I had an accident, and there wasn't anyone around because none of my neighbors could hear me screaming. And so I finally was able to call an ambulance. But we have to be able to help people to navigate that type of thing. I was lucky I had a partner. I was lucky I had neighbors that finally, when they heard the ambulances came out, took care of everything, took care of my dog and all that stuff. But we have to educate folks to begin to start taking care of the baby boomers, because we are way too many. And that's all I'll say right now, but that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you. And I think it's so important for us to remember some of the things you're talking about around community and invisibility and caring for one another, and that doesn't stop being an important part of who we are in faith communities when someone is getting gray hair, especially when people are identify as LGBTQ plus. So thank you so much. Yeah. Dr. Perry, are you ready to share with us?
I'm ready. I thank Reverend Holmes. I have a whole list of what churches could do.
Oh,
and
good.
I hope that we get to that in the discussion. But I wanted to really talk about the Black LGBT senior. And I'm sorry to say that in this short period, I'm not going to talk about the transgender person. And I wanted to talk about the Black senior because while there is research, and there is research on Blacks, the research on Blacks is very, very little, and it's very, very focused. So I want to at least use this opportunity to have people look at who we are, who I am, and begin to think about ways that we might be similar or we might be unique. And I agree again with Reverend Holmes, we have to get out there and do our own research. I'm a former faculty, but for the last 30 years, I've really left that position and worked in communities. And I understand the importance of research from the ground up, because after all, it is the academic person that uses our life experiences to write books and to give lectures and to have classes. But I'm going to kind of read a few data points that I have. There are approximately 10 to 11 million LGBT people, and Black LGBT are approximately 1 million. So we are a small group. Much of the literature on Black LGBT people focuses on adults, and the breakdown beyond 50 years of age is very, very limited. Black LGBT seniors over 50 are likely to live below the poverty levels, have limited educational levels, live in urban areas with children or with an older person for whom they are the caregiver. While 54% of white LGBT people over the age of 50 are partnered, only 29% of Black LGBT people are. Our income below the poverty level for most is $24,000 a year, as compared to 33 Black straight people. So we are, although the research doesn't point this out, I think that we're almost neck and neck with the Black population in general. We are more likely to be unemployed and to experience food insecurity. The majority of us depend on Social Security, SSI, savings, and job-related benefits. And yet the income for most is still below the poverty level. Older adults, and I am one of them, have a constant fear that we will outlive our savings. And we also fear that reductions in Social Security and SSI will further reduce our standard of living. As I mentioned earlier, I think the income levels between Black LGBT and straight vary slightly. And for example, when you look at the income of people from $60,000 a year to $119,000 a year, and some of us are in that category, it's 17%. And for Blacks in general, it's 21%. And let me just say, I think that there is a need when you look at the Black LGBT population. We're always looking at the lowest income levels, the lowest educational levels, but there are still groups of us who are professionals, retired people that bring a different profile, but that profile is hardly ever brought to the public. So that once again, the Black LGBT senior, and while it is true, we are presented in terms of what I call this kind of deficiency presentation. And I'd like to see that change. Healthcare is a problem. Most of us have experienced difficulty in using healthcare systems because of racism, institutional racism, just not seeing us. And when you compound that with our age, it becomes much more difficult to use healthcare systems. I find that myself. I'm like looked through and not seen. I know from experience and from my community work that many Black LGBT people rely on natural medicine and herbal medicine instead of using traditional medicines. And sometimes they simply combine them. Just a few more points. It's interesting to note that as we get older, many of us are using biological families and churches. A Black population in general is said to be more church-going. And we as Black LGBT people
Yeah.
continue that pattern, or we return to that pattern in old age. And it is ironic because these are the two locations that are probably most rejecting of us, which means that we find comfort in those that may harm us. I am the founder and organizer of an organization, LGBT Faith Leaders of African Descent. And we primarily formed to challenge homophobia in the Black community, particularly in the churches. So when I talk about church harm, I talk about church trauma because I see people 50 years of age, 60 years of age, still carrying the deep wounds of having been rejected in their churches, and sometimes stronger than rejection from the pulpit dams. And now here we are, we turn to these same systems that have not been open and accepting. So what I see resulting, and I'm surprised at this, and I think we need more research on this, people returning to the closet after living their entire lives free and open. They decide that it is better not to have to face the same homophobia, fear, rejection. It's better to not say who I am, maybe not reject who I am openly, but at least not proclaim who I am. And that is back in the closet, and it needs to be examined much more closely. And this particularly relates to what Reverend Holmes was talking about. When we retire and move in new communities, when we have to go to nursing homes, when we have to go to any kind of residential setting, do we say who we are? And I say many of us are not saying who we are. We don't have the courage, we don't have the emotional stamina to be facing again rejection. I'm going to stop there. And I have lots more to say, and maybe in the question and answer, I'll get a chance to say it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Perry. And I am just struck by how each of you is lifting up so many things that are important for us to consider, not only consider, but to continue to put in front of ourselves and in front of our faith communities in terms of how we care for one another. And in terms of our whole lives, Melanie is going to take a little bit of time to talk about some of the ways that that ministry and program can help you not solve all these problems, but at least be in community and have some discussions, which we know and have heard from all of you today how important it is to have community and be able to say who you are and be able to have open and honest discussions. So Melanie.
Sure. I want to start. There are a couple questions that have come up, and there are some resources that have been shared in the chat. We will be sharing all of the resources, will be sent out as a follow-up to anybody who registered for this webinar. So you don't have to try to capture them all in the chat yourself. The last one that I put in there was for Gen Silent, which is a wonderful documentary about just what Dr. Perry was talking about. It follows there are some couples and some individuals who are older adults. And one is a trans woman who is actively dying and dealing with, who will support her, will her children support her at the end of her life. There is a couple, one has had some physical issues and also has dementia, and his partner is trying to figure out where to find appropriate housing for him. And then there are also these issues of, is it safe for me to, can I trust my personal care aides to honor my identity and, be faithful in respecting how I have lived my life or how I want to continue living my life. So there are discussion guides online. If anybody in a church or congregation wants to have a screening of Gen Silent, there are discussion questions that you can use to go along with it. So I would highly recommend that as an opportunity for you. So Our Whole Lives is not an LGBTQ curriculum. It is a curriculum for everyone. It includes one workshop specifically on sexual orientation and gender identity, which Jane, Dr. Fleishman, wrote. And the way we approach Our Whole Lives for older adults is that it's learning for the older adults about their own lives and about the lives of their adult children, their grandchildren, and their communities. So it's well-rounded. Anybody can enjoy it. Jane's workshop has a really cool activity in it. First of all, I would say it includes research that Jane did both for her dissertation that then grew into Stonewall Generation, the book that Skinner House published. But so there are quotes from people with different LGBTQ identities in that workshop. And then there's also a timeline, which is really a cool activity of here's what's going on in the world in general, and then here's what was going on in LGBTQ history. So please be sure to explore that. In general, most of the workshops that are in Our Whole Lives will apply to people of any identity, gender identity, or sexual orientation. And there are workshops in there. I briefly mentioned family issues, which has conversations both about being a grandparent as a sexuality educator and about what happens to me when I get older. And, if I do have dementia, who do I want looking out for my sexual life? Who do I trust in my life to make sure that I'm not put in a nursing home that doesn't allow me to have a partner visit? And one of the things that that's really important, we touched a little bit on the housing issues, and there are some housing facilities specifically for, like, William Way housing in Philadelphia is specifically for LGBT folks. There aren't many across the country. And yes, affordability is one aspect. I believe William Way is subsidized financially. In New Jersey, there's only one it used to be Quaker owned. I don't know if it's still Quaker owned, but only one housing community that is open and affirming in its marketing. There are others, but you really have to get to know, interview people, try to find people in the community that you can talk to see. And any of you who have elders in your communities who are making that life transition, if you hear people talking about, I'm thinking about putting my mom or my dad into a nursing home or a long-term care facility, maybe bring out your copy of Owl for Older Adults and bring up some of the questions that it raises, because not every housing center has a policy on sexual behavior. And if they don't, then it's hit or miss whether the people are going to be open to, say, to same-sex partners holding hands or snuggling in bed together. They're not even really cool about heterosexual couples snuggling in bed together, let alone couples who maybe the staff have their own ideas and opinions on. So these are the things that we really have to name. And in addition to sexual rights, that ties into, what are their attitudes about people of different races, and these are difficult, challenging conversations that we can help foster and open the door to what's really going to be the best choice for my parents, what's going to be the best choice for me. So let's not be afraid to open the door to those conversations. And Our Whole Lives for Older Adults will help do that.
I want to add that in New York City, Sage has one building, and a second building is, I don't know if it's up, but it's slated to be LGBT publicly acknowledged.
And Sage is the go-to organization, sage.org, for lots and lots of resources, financial resources, housing resources, healthcare resources, for seniors who are LGBTQ.
Yes.
Jean, you had your hand up, I think.
Yeah, I'm just so glad that you talked about that, Reverend Perry, and also thanks so much for
Doctor.
mentioning.
Dr. Perry.
Oh,
not
Dr.
Reverend.
Perry. Sorry. There's so many reverends here. I'm getting confused. So,
Right.
Dr. Perry, thanks for mentioning Sage New York. I'm in Massachusetts, in the Boston area. We have Fenway, which is a great health center, started during the AIDS crisis, and has really expanded. And they house the LGBTQ Aging Project. Lisa Krinsky is the director of that. She's very cool, and she does a lot of work with Sage on this Sage training. And yesterday I was talking to an assisted living director, and she said, hey, how do I get more LGBTQ inclusivity here? I said, I got it. Call Lisa. And, so it was so nice that she asked me, but many times people don't know who to ask. So if you can just say Sage, that's easy. And if you live in the Boston area, check out the folks at the Fenway.
I want to thank you all again. I'm just so grateful for all of you being here today. We do have we've had a couple of questions in the Q&A that we've answered, but that other people might be interested in. But one is that someone has asked the name of the group that work with the faith communities around LGBT issues, and did we name a book or a link? And I'm trying to think which person might have addressed that. I do know that the Open and Affirming Coalition with the United Church of Christ does quite a lot of work with faith communities around LGBTQ issues. And Melanie, what is the one in the UUA called?
Multicultural Growth and Witness is the group that does our LGBTQ work.
And I know that they have a newsletter, and I know that the ONA coalition is working on some webinars, and in conjunction with the team that I'm on as well, the Gender and Sexuality Justice.
In the Black community, there's Pride in the Pews. My organization that's starting up again, LGBT Faith Leaders of African Descent. There's also Many Faces, Reverend Harmon. There's a number. There are quite a few, and you can just Google the top what you want, and you'll find them.
Yeah.
I have a question for Reverend Holmes. When you were talking about you and your wife retiring, did you have issues specific to the fact that you were gay, or were they just specific to the fact that you were retiring at the same time? Like, did you run into specific hurdles with anything because of your orientation? You're on mute.
Not really. It wasn't until after that fact. And so if we had thought about it ahead of time, but it wasn't until after we had committed to making this move and to do all these things that then we began to be confronted with many issues that we had not thought about. Because we had lived pretty openly. We lived 30 years in our last neighborhood, and lived very openly in the town and all of that. So we were surprised. Shouldn't have been before.
Such an important thing, because recreating community, like after you've been somewhere for 30 years, recreating community is huge. And to realize that being able to do that, I'm thinking about what you said, like how you did that when you were still young enough, right? And I have said to my partner, we need a deadline. We are not going to do this on our own. Like, we need a deadline. Like, if by this age, if we are not out of this house,
right,
get out of this house and go somewhere or where our next step is. And to be thinking about that now, like in our early 60s.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, because of all of those things that you're talking about. And like, is it going to be somewhere else? Or is it going to be somewhere else in this community? Or is it going to be somewhere by one of our children? Or, and where will they be then?
Right.
Those kind of things, right?
But even if you stay in your community moves.
Right.
The point about Anne, that you were making about churches and congregations needing to really support and serve older folks. I have heard folks who are, like in their 70s and 80s say, I don't want to be just the deep pockets of my church. That the thinking that, that you're retired, so you got all the time in the world and you have all the money to donate. But, we really need to remain in community with folks and give as much as we hope to receive in terms of time and talent and treasure.
The other thing I was gonna say, just from some personal experience as well, is that sometimes, I mean, we're talking about like, what are the choices for people, where people can live, or where they can go and receive care. And sometimes it isn't a very wide choice. If someone's in the hospital and they have to go to rehab, there may be like 2 or 3 places that you're offered as family members where there's a bed. That's a very serious issue, and it may not be the place that is the most LGBTQ friendly. So I think that, not to be like all doom and gloom, but I think that it's really important for us to know and be aware of our healthcare system and how it works and how it doesn't work, and what we wish it would do is different from how it is. And are there ways that we can advocate locally and nationally for changes that we want? That's a long term, that arc slowly bending toward justice. But in the meantime, yeah, our faith community is stepping up to really provide some community.
I wanted
right?
to talk more about what churches can do. I actually hold membership in 2 UCC churches, and I know that the denomination is very friendly, but there are many more things we can do. I also have been on the advisory board of New York State Equality. And one of the things that I do is to visit churches and talk about the current bills that we do have in New York State or we don't have in New York State. And most people are surprised that LGBT people do not have as much protection as they think that we have. Actually, there are only 29 states that have non-discrimination protection in place. And the Federal Equality Act that would secure that across the nation and not in piecemeal patchwork, that has lingered since 2021, not passed. So that is at least one of the strong things I think that churches can do. And the Reverend mentioned, I don't want to talk too much, but this is really, for me, something I feel strongly about, as the rest of you do. Place visible signs of acceptance in the entrance, in the lobbies, in the bulletins, in the program materials, in the bathrooms, in the pulpits. We had an experience in one church where the security had not been properly trained on LGBT issues, and a transgender person was going in the woman's bathroom, and he stopped her and said she could not do that. If that happened, that is a situation for the church to be concerned about.
Yes.
And I don't know that the church took it that much of concern. Provide information and training for all of the staff, the ushers, the greeting people, the security, the bookstore people, whoever has a connection to the church. Acknowledge your LGBT people in the service, in the sermons, in the greetings, in the programs. I know my community looks all the time for these things. You may think you have a flag outside or a plaque outside, but then once we enter, we want to know, well, what are you doing? Right. What else are you doing? So those are important things. I get very radical maybe on this, that I think some of these sacraments ought to be given and spoken of and in such a way that it is clear that you are LGBT accepted.
Yes.
Make the marriage, make the baptisms. Even if the person standing in front of you is not LGBT, you can still acknowledge in that particular experience.
Mhm.
I have a whole list of 13, but I'm going to stop. I'll be glad to share them.
No, thank you. And that brings up something. I'm looking up the link right now as we're talking. National Coming Out Day is coming up next week, and the UCC is putting on a queer and wonderfully made worship service. And I'm going to put that link to register in the chat right now. And they're going to have several people, but as a special musical guest, Flamey Grant. So if you've not heard the music of Flamey Grant, it's beautiful and amazing and LGBTQ affirming and Christian. So for the Christians on the call and church people on the call, this is a worship service specifically designed to affirm and show the belovedness of all of who we are and our diversity and our community together. So if that's something that's of interest to you, I hope that you'll register and join us on October 11th. It's from 7 to 8 p.m. ET.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring up something that's silly, but that is critical in the life of older folks, and that is recreation. And how do we get those needs met? Now, I happen to start playing pickleball. Now, I realize pickleball, blah, 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 but I go to a place where there aren't any other lesbian or gay people or anything. And I wear pickleball t-shirts that are LGBTQ friendly and all the time. And I find that if it wasn't me, the way I am, it would be hard to go there and to be fully present, to be able to be fully who I am in a place like that. And that's, or to a gym. When my wife and I joined a gym together, and those kinds of things are also important that churches kind of have their ear to the ground about, and how can they help those of us who might be uncomfortable get out and exercise.
I think in a general sense, I remember when my parents, they've both passed now, but when they were alive, the last couple of years, it was several medical appointments a week, and they weren't even as bad off as many people. And they had to quit going to church because they were so exhausted by the weekend. And they had been selling coffee for fair trade for, decades and really active. And it was only the minister, and they had a minister who was more like a caring committee kind of outreach minister. And those were the only people from the church that reached out to them. And that's really a shame that we need to maintain all kinds of contact. And as you said, the socializing and the fun stuff. And you mentioned the issues with driving. There's a workshop in OWL for older adults on loss. And the first activity is naming all the different kinds of loss. And that includes losing your teeth, maybe that's part of your body image, losing your driver's license, because, you don't have the function to drive anymore. There's a lot of things about our self-esteem and our sense of self that can be lost with age.
Yes.
And that support system that you mentioned, especially LGBTQ folks who may not have adult children to help them out, who's looking out for their interests?
I want to say, I just popped in the chat not only the registration for the Coming Out Day worship service, but also the UCC is working on a new campaign called Love is Louder. And in August, there were 4 webinars with the ONA Coalition, Open and Affirming Coalition, that were deep listening to LGBTQIA experiences. So that webinar link to access those is on there. We have t-shirts, UCC resources.
But are they pickleball?
Coming up in 2024, we will also have some I believe it's monthly affinity groups online available. So it's just stay tuned. There's more coming for us to be providing some care, at least virtually, for some folks. And that isn't to say that all of us shouldn't go, who are connected to a faith community, and go light a fire if it isn't already lit. And there are also some things the national setting is doing in order to try to help provide community as well.
There was a question in the question box about whether Our Whole Lives for Older Adults addresses personal safety. And there are conversations throughout the workshop. In Family Matters, the Family Matters workshop, we talk about caregivers, and we talk about it also in a workshop that's about, I can't remember the title right now, but it's about sexual safety, not in a safer sex kind of way. We do have a workshop on that, but in terms of the misuse of sexuality, there is a workshop on that. Then we also talk about a different kind of safety in the final workshop on sex play beyond basics, and we talk about kink and the kind of contracting and conversations that need to happen around consent. Even if you're with a partner that you're enjoying, how are you going to negotiate how you are sexual with that person? So those conversations are threaded throughout the curriculum in many ways. We wanted to take a minute before we thank our guests today. We have OWL trainer Onika Henry is going to join us on November 1st, I believe it is.
Yeah, November 1st.
And Onika has been on 2 TED Talks in Spain about Carnival. She's from Trinidad and Tobago, and about the cultural sexual messaging and spiritual messaging of Carnival is one of her specialties, but she also does a lot of other kinds of sex ed that's culturally appropriate. So she will be our guest in November.
And that's a change. So that's a change from what we thought it was going to be. So just you heard it here first. I wanted to say one other thing before we thank everyone and wrap up. And somebody had put in the Q&A about vandalism to churches that put flags and signs and stuff out. And in my local church is one that has experienced that. And there was a conversation at one point about, like, how can we have doors, God's doors are open to all in rainbow colors. How can we make our doors more, more indestructible? And I mean, I think that's a great conversation to have, but I also think that part of that ministry of putting flags and doors or whatever you do is that you're going to be replacing them. That's just part of the deal, like to stay in the conversation and know that you're going to need to not do that once, but probably many times. And I live in a very, quote, progressive blue state, right? But there are still, no matter where you are, no matter what community you're in, to just know that this is a long haul conversation. This is a long haul way to show up and be there for each other.
Thank you.
So with that, I just want to thank Dr. Perry and Dr. Fleishman and Reverend Holmes and Dr. Davis so very much for being with us today, and for Laura on tech support, who's been throwing all kinds of stuff in the chat for us. We will capture the things that are in the chat. If you did not check on your registration that you were willing to receive some emails or communication from the UCC, then you won't get that follow-up email. However, it will be on our YouTube channel in the resources section, which is underneath, I think it says more, and underneath the where the video is, then you'll be able to find those resources.
Yeah, and the resources are also all of our, somebody had asked, I missed last month, how can I see it? In addition to the UCC's YouTube channel and OWL Taking Flight playlist, you can find all the archived video links on the OWL page, facilitator resources page on uua.org.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Too. So yeah, thank you. Thank you.
all.
We look forward to seeing all of our listeners next month too. So take care.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you all.